job to moderate sometimes under tight time pressure.
Did we have Tina immediately? No. Yeah. It was the book awards at the same time. It's crazy scheduling. They maybe shouldn't have the talk at that particular point. It's a shame. It's what it is.
C'est bon? You will hear me now. On peut lancer la sélection des images? Yeah. So from one great photographer to another one, I'm really very glad to have this next conversation with the great American photographer Tina Barney. Tina, welcome. Thank you very much for joining us. Thank you.
Bonjour tout le monde. Bon après-midi. Alors ça marche?
Closer. So it's regarding Tina's new publication, aptly titled "The Beginning." It's published by Radius.
Yes. Radius, yay!
And the book revisits Tina Barney's very early work, taken between 1976 and 1980, foreshadowing the acclaimed breakthrough series and publication that would come later on, Theater of Manners and the Europeans, the seminal photographic color work on the lives, traditions, and domestic settings of the Anglo-American upper classes, most of whom friends and family. So, Tina, thank you very much. In this new book, which we see some excerpts in the back, we discover some of your earlier work, photographs taken at the end of the 70s, 80s, of your friends and family. Can you tell us why you decided to revisit this and publish these very early photographs of your formative years and how it came about?
Well, the answer is kind of boring. I think this happened to many people in the world is COVID happened. And I'm sitting in my house in Rhode Island, with all the negatives that I had made from the beginning, sitting there that I'd never really scanned or looked at. And that's how it really happened. It's as simple as that. So I started scanning them. And scanning them in a very kind of strict way. So let's start with that. Then do you want me to go on? Okay. The main thing that happened is I found a friend who is a wonderful book designer. And that's, to me, one of the most important parts of all. And I gave him those scans without telling him one single thing about who the people were, whether they were important to me or not. He knew my work, but I told him nothing about these scans. I didn't want to have any kind of preconceived idea about them. He then, a couple of months later, brought me a dummy, which was so fantastic, so way beyond my dreams. And that's how it all began. The next step, as many people here probably know, is finding the publisher. And that's not an easy thing to do. And luckily, someone had mentioned Radius who I'd never heard of, and David Schicky, who's the head of Radius, liked the dummy, and that's the beginning of the story of the beginning.
Thank you. There is one photograph in the book that we're going to see come back that you choose to republish, and that's one of the very few early photographs that you already published in Theater of Manners. That's the one entitled Amy, Phil, and Brian near the swimming pool. And I think it's an important one because it's also your first attempt at stage photography. And I wanted to know if there are other photographs in this book that you would come to see defining as later in your for later in your practice.
Well, of course, that's hard to do because you just pass by one of the images and we can't control the slideshow. And you don't know what I'm talking about unless we wait for it to come. Let's see, let's come on. Oh, forget it. Okay, so...
but can you tell about Amy, Phil, and Brian while we wait for the...
Amy, Phil, and Brian, throughout this book, I realized is the first time I actually directed people in a photograph for the sake of the narrative. And what's important to mark or to point out is in 1978, I think it was sacrilegious to tell somebody what to do in a photograph. This was the time of Gary Winogrand and Lee Friedlander. It was absolutely part of the whole kind of, not religion, but the way things were done is to let things happen and to not alter anything. And I knew about those photographers, and I knew what a big deal it was to say, oh, can you move over here, or can you do this, or can you do that. But I wanted to say something very specific. I wanted to talk about how I thought families weren't close enough together. So I put my son in the middle. I asked Brian to be on one side of the pool, Amy to be on the other. And that was to show that I thought that there was too much space between these figures, to show I thought there was too much distance between family members. So it's as simple as that. Throughout the book, throughout the years, I kept taking many pictures, I kept taking workshops. I had never gone to photography school before. I was completely self-taught, but I was surrounded by people in this place I lived in a ski resort. There was a small photography school that happened to have a lot of the most important photographers in America come to teach, and sometimes I was the only student. And I learned about just the structure of a photograph and how to make it. And then finally I would get to a point where I think there are a couple of pictures, not that one, in this book, that are on the brink of something that I think I was just dreaming of. I wasn't quite sure what it was. I had sort of, I call a hunch in mind of what I wanted. Unfortunately, we can't control these for me to show you what that was. I wish I had the book here. Anyway, let's go on to the next question.
Yes.
Until we find that picture.
Yeah, until we find that one. So you described those early photographs in an interview as loose sketches a painter might use to plan for a larger painting. And yet you're coming back to them after having certainly created larger paintings and more exactly developed your work in different creative directions. Is there also a need for a nostalgic reconnection?
Okay, let me go back to what you're saying. When I was I guess I wrote this, that they're loose sketches that a painter would make before they make the final painting. Is again, if you're artists, I think if you're artists, you might know what it's like to sort of have a dream in mind, not exactly know what it is. I call it a hunch. I don't know how you can translate that in another language. You can't pinpoint what it is. And I think what you should do, or what your brain does, is you're trying to get there, you're trying to get there, and trying to get there, and then sometimes it just comes and it happens. Here we go. I'm going to take this time to quickly look, because I think it's important.
We're going to take a second to find the photograph. So that's Amy, Phil, and Brian, the first stage photography of...
What I didn't like about this picture
I can help you.
is that I thought it was stiff. I thought it was just stiff and not loose, not this dream I had in mind. So I had to work back and get to something that I wanted more. This wasn't it. It did describe this. Can you hold that for me? Thanks. It did describe the center, these here, to show this space that I thought was between family members. Okay, now I'm going to show you.
The other one.
Hold on. Can you hold that for me? So this is what I guess you'd say I'm proud of. I think I'm more proud now than I was when I made it. I wish you could hold this while I'm talking, but what I'm proud of is this here. All these different structural things that are happening that are part of the narrative, but I think structure-wise, they make the photograph very interesting. And this one too, very much more interesting. That not great. Because look at all these things that go in here, but also see how the designer did this. There are these repetitions. Anyway, I think those are more interesting than the Amy, Phil, and Brian.
Okay, thank you very much. So I wanted to ask you if there was a need for like nostalgic reconnection also for you to the book, or not at all.
That word nostalgia, I think, is too general a word. I mean, I think you can use it. To me, nostalgia, if you look up in the dictionary, it means a longing to go back to the past. I think that's too general. I mean, it's too easy to use that word. I think there are more things than that. I think there were many narratives that I had in mind, and it's taken 20 years and more to keep on trying to dig up all the different things that I want to talk about, and each picture might talk about something different, but nostalgia is a general word. You know, I think that's great for someone who's writing about the picture to say that this is about nostalgia. It's much more than that.
Okay, thank you. I wanted to know how you worked on the editing of the book with Radius, and what was the thought process with the publishers?
I didn't work with Radius on the editing. The editing had to do with the designer, whose work I gave. I gave the negatives to him, not telling him one single thing. So obviously, he designed the book based on design and graphics and things that would connect in a narrative way, not knowing what my narrative was, and visually too. I mean, I could show you that if I had the book in front of you. It's too difficult to do here, I'm sorry to say. And I think that whatever he did talked about the things that were important to me. This is a very complicated thing to answer. I'd love to tell you all and have the pictures in front of me and dissect it to show you how interesting it is to have a great designer sort of put things together that makes sense to you.
Thank you, Tina. I think we have a minute for a question. If someone has a question for Tina Barney.
I'd like to talk about this cover. Yes, I'd like to talk about this cover also, which interests me still to today. This square green, you see the square green patch? That interests me so much because I think it does something that photography does that can't be explained in other mediums. And we could go on for a long time about that, but let's go on to your question.
How did you choose your locations?
I can't hear you.
Oh, okay. I can speak louder.
Now
you hear me now?
Now I can hear
okay.
you.
How did you choose your locations? Did you had some places in mind, or you just carry your camera always with you and document your life?
I live in a very, very small town in Rhode Island where I knew a great deal of the people. I then moved to a ski resort in Idaho, very small town where I knew a lot of the people. So it was almost like I was surrounded by familiarity that had to do with many of the things I was interested to. So it was like having a palette of paint right there in front of me all the time that I could pick and choose. The hard part was I always was very shy about even asking my sister or my brother to pose. I never bothered them very much. I never bothered my friends very much. But I would see things and then say, okay, I'm going to go back and photograph that again another day. I never would carry the camera around, around my neck with me like that. I would find something, go home, and then plan it another day and then hope that accident might happen.
Okay. Thank you very much, Tina. So the book, The Beginning, is published by Radius and available at the fair. I do not know if you have a book signing at one point.
Tomorrow, 4 o'clock at Radius.
Okay. Well,
All
thank
of
you.
you come and all of you buy the book.
Thank you so much.